I'd always believed in the clarity of numbers. Numbers don't lie. They tell the truth, even when people around you want to bury it. That's why, when I stumbled upon the irregularities in Clearview Financial's accounts, it felt like my whole world shifted. It started small, just a couple of transactions that didn't quite sit right. A few $1 million moved around, but everything seemed cloaked under a veil of complicated company names, shell corporations, nothing too unusual at first glance. But the deeper I dug, the more disturbing it became. The routing patterns were sloppy, the amounts inflated. It wasn't the kind of error you could make by accident. I remember the first time I noticed something was off. It was late on a Friday afternoon, and I was hunched over my desk, just like I always was at the end of the week, scanning through reports and closing out the files before heading home. The company's books were usually meticulous, even when I'd found discrepancies before. Clearview Financial was respected in the industry for its transparency and accuracy. I wasn't expecting to find anything out of the ordinary, but as I sifted through the data, one transaction caught my eye. The figures were far too high for what should have been a routine transfer. And the sender and receiver accounts, those names didn't match anything in the company's approved lists. I couldn't understand why these accounts were being used for such large sums of money. It didn't take long for my curiosity to turn into something else, unease. There were more. Dozens more. Patterns emerged, like a spider's web, connecting the dots between shell companies and strange routing numbers. It wasn't just one instance. It was an ongoing operation that had been running under the radar. I was already on edge. I knew something was wrong, and I couldn't ignore it. I pulled together a report, clean, professional, detailed. The evidence was undeniable. I could see it in front of me. The money wasn't just moving through Clearview's accounts. It was being funneled into offshore banks, hidden in plain sight. It was laundering, plain and simple. I took the findings to Richard Brooke, my manager, expecting him to share my shock. I was nervous, my heart pounding as I presented the file. I'd worked under Richard for a year, and he'd always seemed like the kind of guy who would support doing the right thing, even if it was difficult. But when I handed over the report, I could sense the immediate change in his demeanor. Richard didn't even look at it properly at first. He skimmed through the pages quickly, muttering under his breath. "Jason, these clients are too valuable. We can't afford to raise a red flag over a few irregular transactions. Let it go." His words hit me like a brick. I thought I'd misheard. How could he say that? How could he dismiss it like it was nothing? I wanted to argue, to press him, to tell him that this wasn't something we could just overlook, but I stayed quiet. What was the point? The truth was there in black and white, but Richard was far more interested in keeping his job than doing the right thing. I could see it in his eyes, he wasn't going to support me. He didn't care. "Jason, this isn't our problem," Richard said as he stood up, gathering the papers and tossing them aside. "We have enough to worry about already. I suggest you drop this." I couldn't speak. I just stood there, rooted to the spot, watching as he turned away and returned to his desk, as if nothing had happened. As if the weight of what I had discovered didn't matter. I walked out of his office, my head spinning. My gut twisted. I felt nauseous. He didn't care. He couldn't care. But I did. And that's when I realized that my life, and everything I knew about Clearview, had just changed. The following morning, I received an email that confirmed my worst fears. "Due to company restructuring, your position is no longer required." Just like that, my world turned upside down. I was out. No explanation. No warning. Just a clean, efficient severance. I tried to process it as I packed up my desk, but the words felt like they had been ripped straight from the script of a bad movie. How could they do this? How could they just sweep it all under the rug? I hadn't even gotten a chance to react before the door to my office was locked, my access terminated. The strange thing was, I wasn't angry. Not yet. But something inside me was broken. The scales had fallen from my eyes, and I couldn't unsee what I discovered. Clearview Financial wasn't just another corporation, it was a corrupt machine, and I had been working right alongside it. I spent the next few hours in a daze, pacing around my apartment. It was a tiny place in the heart of Seattle, just big enough for me and my things. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, and I couldn't shake the sense that this wasn't over. It was just beginning. And that's when I made my decision. I moved to Seattle 3 years ago with high hopes, like any young professional fresh out of graduate school. My master's degree in financial analysis had given me the tools I needed to succeed, but what they didn't teach me was how the real world worked, or how easily one could fall into the trap of corporate complacency. Before joining Clearview Financial, I'd lived in a quiet town on the outskirts of Portland. The kind of place where the pace of life was slow, and people knew each other's business. I didn't mind that. It was simple. Predictable. I enjoyed the small-town atmosphere, but I wanted more for myself. I wanted to make a real impact. That's why I moved to Seattle, where the opportunities were limitless. Clearview was the perfect company for me. Well-respected. Established. The job was exactly what I had dreamed of, a financial analyst role with a solid salary, an office with a window, and a team of people who seemed driven by success. It was a sharp contrast to the life I had left behind. From the start, I dove into the work. I wasn't particularly social, and I didn't mind that. I focused on what I was best at, analyzing data. I loved the process of digging into numbers, finding patterns where others saw chaos. There was satisfaction in knowing that if I just looked hard enough, I would uncover the truth behind the numbers. And that's what I thought Clearview was all about: truth. Transparency. Integrity. But, looking back, I realize I ignored a lot of the signs that there was something off. In the beginning, it was small things. Unexplained bonuses for high-level executives. Small discrepancies here and there that didn't add up but weren't enough to question. I brushed it off, telling myself that things like this happened in big companies all the time. Clearview had a solid reputation in the industry. Clients trusted us. Investors praised our results. But now, I realized that reputation was built on smoke and mirrors. And I had been a part of it. I'd ignored the cracks in the foundation, hoping they would disappear if I didn't look too closely. The real tipping point came after I'd been there for about a year. The work became routine. My day was spent in front of spreadsheets, analyzing reports, creating projections. At first, I enjoyed it. It felt like I was doing something important. But slowly, I began to feel disconnected. My role, while important, wasn't at the forefront. I was a cog in a machine, doing my job without truly understanding the bigger picture. It was only when I started noticing the patterns, the things that didn't add up, that I realized the machine was broken. And then there was Richard Brooke. Richard was the kind of manager who loved to be seen. He had a way of charming the upper management with his polished presentation and easy smile. He made things happen, at least outwardly. But beneath the surface, I began to notice things that didn't sit right. He was always too calm. Too controlled. He'd slip in and out of meetings, leaving behind an aura of authority but never much substance. I was grateful for the job, of course, but I couldn't help but wonder how far Richard was willing to go to protect the company. To protect himself. As the months passed, I realized Richard wasn't the only one who seemed to be operating in the shadows. I'd see other employees moving in and out of the offices, coming and going at odd hours, always with an air of secrecy. The work environment was stifling, too much corporate jargon, too many smiles masking the lies beneath. The idea of loyalty felt more like an obligation than a value. And that's when I began to see through the cracks in the facade. The irregularities, the things I had pushed aside in the beginning, began to catch up with me. I couldn't ignore them anymore. It was around this time that I started to question everything. Clearview had offered me a path to success. I'd worked hard to get here, and I had everything to lose if I didn't keep my head down. But as I sat in my cubicle, watching Richard and others go about their business, I realized that staying silent wasn't an option anymore. I had to know the truth, even if it meant risking everything. I didn't know it yet, but the discovery I would make in just a few weeks would change everything. It wasn't just about numbers anymore. It was about integrity. It was about doing what was right, even when no one else was willing to. I thought I was just another financial analyst, another person who crunched numbers and helped the company stay on track. But in the end, I was more than that. I was someone who had a choice to make: follow the path they had set for me, or take a stand and risk it all. And that choice would come sooner than I ever expected. By the time I found the smoking gun, I was too far into it to turn back. The numbers, the patterns, the irregularities, they were all there, staring at me in stark black and white clarity. It took weeks to dig through the reports, tracing every wire transfer, every client name, every shadowy account. But the deeper I went, the clearer the truth became. The fraud was systemic. It wasn't just a few isolated incidents, it was a full-blown money laundering operation. The amounts were staggering. Over $3 million had passed through these shell companies in just the last 6 months, and it didn't stop there. The same names kept popping up. Accounts linked to overseas banks, invoices for goods that didn't exist. The figures didn't lie, no matter how I looked at them. Richard's name was at the center of it all. I couldn't believe it at first. I had trusted him. We'd worked together, shared the same office, exchanged casual conversations about weekends and vacations. How could he be involved in something so vile? But the evidence didn't lie. I wasn't imagining it. Richard was not just aware of the activities, I was beginning to think he was the mastermind behind it all. My first instinct was to confront him. I thought maybe, just maybe, there had been some misunderstanding. But I knew that wasn't going to happen. I'd seen the way he brushed off concerns in the past, how dismissive he could be of anything that could rock the boat. He was too clever for that, and I was just another analyst in a sea of employees. Still, I couldn't just sit back and do nothing. I printed out everything I had gathered. Every transaction. Every name. Every shell company. I organized the documents meticulously. This wasn't just some misplaced decimal or clerical error. This was deliberate. But even as I prepared to take action, I knew the stakes. I wasn't just risking my job. I was risking my future. If I exposed this, the company would come after me, and I wasn't naive enough to think that I'd win in a corporate battle. I was just a 28-year-old junior analyst. Richard and the company were too powerful. But I couldn't stay silent. I had to do something. The next step was clear: I needed help. But who could I trust? Catherine Hale was an option. She was a senior analyst at Clearview, someone I'd crossed paths with a few times but never worked with closely. From the outside, Catherine seemed like the model employee, sharp, competent, and well-respected. But there was something about her that told me she wasn't just playing the game like everyone else. I'd noticed her unease in the past, the way she would pause mid-conversation, like she was seeing things from a different perspective. I decided to approach her cautiously. After I was let go, I still had access to the company's servers for a few more days. I reached out to Catherine by email, sending her a brief message with the subject line, "Need to talk," about Clearview. She responded within hours. When we met up at a coffee shop near the office, I could see the wariness in her eyes. "You found something, haven't you?" she asked, not bothering with pleasantries. It was as if she already knew what I was going to say. I showed her the files I had compiled, every document detailing the shell companies, the accounts, and the large sums of money moving through them. Her expression changed as she flipped through the papers. It was a mix of disbelief and recognition, like she had known something was off but hadn't been able to put it together. After a long silence, she said, "This is big, Jason. Bigger than I thought. But if we go down this road, there's no turning back. She paused, looking me directly in the eye. Do you realize what you're risking? I didn't have to answer her. I knew the risks. I had already been fired. I had already been erased from the company's records, but I couldn't let it go. Not after what I'd uncovered. Not after seeing the names involved, people I once respected, people I had worked beside. But Catherine was right. The consequences were enormous. If we were wrong, it would cost us everything. But if we were right, there were people who needed to be exposed, people who had gotten away with it for too long. We spent the next few hours discussing what to do next. Catherine agreed to help me. She would look into it further. We would dig deeper. And together, we would figure out how to bring this to light. But as soon as I made that decision, I knew that things were only going to get worse. The next day, I received a letter from Clearview's legal team. They accused me of theft, stealing company data, violating my non-disclosure agreement. They claimed I had fabricated the evidence and threatened to sue me for defamation and breach of contract. I didn't flinch. I knew that going public with this was going to be dangerous. I knew Clearview would stop at nothing to protect its name, to protect the executives at the top who were pulling the strings. But I couldn't back down now. Not when I had the truth on my side. Catherine and I agreed to take our findings to the authorities. We weren't sure who could be trusted anymore, Clearview's executives were too powerful. But if the company wasn't going to stop, then it was time for someone else to step in. I took a deep breath as I walked out of the coffee shop that day. I had already made the decision. There was no turning back now. The legal threats came fast and furious. Clearview's legal department wasn't wasting any time trying to intimidate me. The letter I received was just the beginning. It was followed by phone calls, emails, and even a visit from a lawyer at my apartment, demanding I cease and desist from sharing any information about the company. They accused me of everything from theft to espionage, claiming I was trying to sabotage their reputation. But every accusation felt like it only confirmed my suspicions. If they had nothing to hide, why were they going to such lengths to silence me? I could feel the pressure mounting, but the more they pushed, the more certain I became. I wasn't going to be intimidated. I couldn't go back to a life of pretending everything was fine when I knew the truth. I took the next step, I went to Catherine. She had been doing her own digging since we last met. The more she uncovered, the deeper the conspiracy went. The fraud wasn't limited to just the accounts I had found. She had discovered more evidence, accounts connected to major players in other industries, clients who were using Clearview as a front to launder money on a much larger scale than I had first imagined. The network was vast, with connections to overseas banks and shell companies that spanned the globe. These were powerful people, untouchable people, with money and influence that went beyond Clearview. Jason, we can't do this alone, Catherine said, her voice calm but edged with urgency. This is bigger than us. We need to bring in someone who can handle this, someone who has the resources. We spent hours in that cramped cafe, going over every last detail. Catherine made phone calls to trusted colleagues who might be able to help. But all the while, I knew the clock was ticking. Each moment we delayed was another opportunity for Clearview to cover their tracks. The pressure was mounting, and we couldn't afford to wait much longer. If we were going to blow the whistle, we had to do it now. The FBI. That's who Catherine suggested we reach out to. She had some connections in law enforcement, and although she didn't know them well, she trusted them to handle things discreetly. I wasn't sure what I expected from them. But I knew we had to act. The evidence was there. The money was there. The system had been rigged, and Clearview was at the center of it all. At first, I hesitated. I had already lost my job. I had already been branded a troublemaker. Going to the FBI was the final step into the unknown. I could go down for this, too, and I didn't even know if they'd be able to protect me. I didn't know if they'd believe me. But Catherine's words kept echoing in my mind. We can't live in a world where this kind of thing is allowed to happen. Someone has to stand up. And in that moment, I realized she was right. This wasn't just about me anymore. It wasn't about saving my career or protecting my reputation. It was about doing what was right. It was about holding the powerful accountable. I took a deep breath and dialed the number Catherine had given me. The voice on the other end was calm, steady, everything I wasn't feeling at that moment. "Special Agent Miller," the voice said. "How can I help you?" I explained the situation as quickly and clearly as I could, outlining everything I had found. The fraudulent transactions, the shell companies, the money laundering. I offered everything I had, every document, every report, every account number I traced. The agent listened without interruption, and when I was finished, she said, "We'll need to meet in person. We'll take it from here." It was the beginning of something far bigger than I had ever imagined. The next few days were a whirlwind. The FBI took the information we gave them seriously. They launched their investigation immediately. Catherine and I were told to stay low, to avoid drawing attention. It was like being in the eye of a storm, everything felt quiet, but I knew what was coming next. I had always been the quiet, dependable type. The one who played by the rules, who did his job and never made a scene. But now, I was living in a world where nothing was certain anymore. I wasn't just an analyst anymore. I was a whistleblower, and the path ahead of me was anything but clear. The FBI agents who took over the investigation were thorough. They verified everything we had uncovered, cross-referenced it with their own intelligence, and began building their case. The deeper they dug, the more evidence they uncovered. This wasn't just a couple of rogue employees making shady deals, it was a coordinated operation that spanned continents. The amount of money involved was staggering, and it had been going on for years. But despite the progress, it didn't take long for Clearview to find out we were involved. A lawyer showed up at my door again, demanding I stop cooperating with the investigation. But this time, I stood my ground. I wasn't backing down. The FBI was putting together a raid of Clearview's offices, and they were preparing to arrest several senior executives. The entire company was going to be exposed, and I had no idea how things would unfold. The next few days passed in a haze of uncertainty, pressure, and cautious optimism. I kept my head down, trying to avoid any unnecessary attention, while simultaneously waiting for the next move. I had handed the evidence over to the FBI, but I knew that I couldn't just sit idly by. This was my life, my reputation, and everything I had worked for that was on the line. As if on cue, I received a call from Catherine, her voice strained but resolute. "Jason, they're digging deeper. I found more. It's not just Clearview and the clients we know about. There are other groups involved, other schemes that are being protected by people inside Clearview. And they're much more widespread than we thought." I felt a chill run through me as I listened to her. The money laundering operation was a spiderweb, and Clearview was just the tip of the iceberg. There were entire networks of companies and individuals using Clearview as a cover for illicit activities, everything from tax evasion to drug trafficking. It was a deeply entrenched system, and it seemed like the more we uncovered, the more dangerous it became. "Jason, we're in deeper than I ever realized," Catherine continued. "I don't know who we can trust anymore. Some of the people involved are untouchable. And these clients, they have powerful connections. They have the kind of influence that could make this disappear, just like that." She was right. The scope of this fraud was unimaginable. It wasn't just a matter of a few misled clients or corrupt executives. This was an entire ecosystem of corruption, running parallel to legitimate business, siphoning off millions from unsuspecting victims. I could already feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. This wasn't just a corporate scandal. This was a global operation. I needed advice, legal advice. Fast. I reached out to a lawyer I had been referred to through a former colleague. His name was Nathan Gray, and he had a reputation for handling high-profile cases involving whistleblowers. He listened patiently as I explained everything, walking him through the fraud, the the shell companies, and Clearview's involvement. When I finished, there was a long pause on the other end of the line. I held my breath, waiting for his response. "Jason," he said slowly, "what you've uncovered is massive. And the stakes are higher than you think. I've worked on cases like this before, and I can tell you right now, you've got two options. You can either continue down this road and expose them, but you'll need protection. Serious protection. Or you can walk away. But once you make your move, there's no turning back." I wasn't surprised by his words. I knew the stakes. But walking away wasn't an option. I couldn't. Not after everything I had seen. Not after everything I knew. "Let's do this," I told him, my voice firm. "I need your help." Over the next few days, Nathan set up a plan. He would represent me through the entire process, ensuring I had legal protection in case things went south. He also arranged for a confidential meeting with the FBI, where we would go over all the new evidence Catherine had uncovered. It was clear that the case was growing exponentially larger, and with each new discovery, it became more dangerous. As the investigation continued, we began to realize just how vast the network was. There were names in the files I didn't recognize, high-profile individuals with political and financial clout. Clearview wasn't just a small-time operation. It was the cornerstone of an international conspiracy. The money was flowing through every channel imaginable, and no one was safe. Even the clients we thought were innocent were part of the scheme. Powerful corporations, well-known celebrities, and influential figures had all been involved, their names buried under layers of legal protections and false documentation. And it wasn't just about the money. There were lives at stake. People were being hurt by the very system Clearview had set up. These weren't just financial crimes, they were human rights violations. People were being exploited for profit, and the ones responsible were hiding behind their wealth and influence, untouchable by the law. That's when the FBI finally began to act. We were notified that a raid was being planned at Clearview's headquarters. The agency was prepared to swoop in and gather evidence, arrest key figures, and bring the entire operation down. But even as we prepared for that, I couldn't help but wonder how deep this went. How many other companies were involved? How many others had been pulling the strings behind the scenes? Catherine and I sat together in my apartment late one night, going over our findings. The weight of what we were about to do was suffocating. Every document, every phone call, every piece of evidence felt like it could be our undoing. There were so many unknowns. So many things that could go wrong. But there was also a part of me that felt a strange sense of resolve. "We have to finish this," Catherine said softly, her voice steady despite the chaos. "We can't back down now. Too many people have suffered because of this. We have to see it through." And so, we did. With the FBI preparing to move in, with the evidence in hand, and with the knowledge that the future was uncertain, we made the choice to go forward.